All right, this week we are covering subqueries, and they are probably one of the more difficult things that we do in this class, which is why I pushed them back to week 10. You can see that's chapter 6. So if we were going to go through the book in order, we would have been covering them much earlier, but it is something that students do seem to struggle with a little bit. So make sure you read through the book, go through the lecture demo. Basically, a subquery is an entire select inside another select. And so in this case, we are using it to get data for a column. Okay, so this little example wants to display the units ordered. And to get that, we had to do a completely separate select. In addition to using a subquery to generate data within a column, oftentimes they're used in where clauses. And so that's another place that you will typically see a subquery. So this is basically grabbing invoice number, date, and total. And the filter here is the where. So we're looking for a vendor ID that's in this result set. So basically, the result set here in the subquery is going to be vendors in California. And so it's only going to be looking for vendor IDs out of that group. Okay, so this is another example of how you use a subquery. And so to compound the issue, you can have several different types of subqueries. So you can have one that returns one row, or it might not return any. So if it's in a where clause, it could be there are no results. You could have a multiple row subquery like we saw up here, because there's going to definitely be more than one vendor in California. You can set it up so that you have several different subqueries generating multiple columns. You can do nested subqueries and correlated subqueries. And correlated subqueries are very similar to self-joins, where you have a table that you are joining to itself. So you do definitely want to go through here. And as I said, the most common use of a subquery would be to generate a column or using it in the where clause. Okay, so basically we go through here and you learn different ways of generating these, and you'll learn some new keywords. So all, any, or some is typically used in a subquery where you're looking at a result set. So a correlated subquery is almost like a nested loop. So if you have like an outer while loop and an inner loop, it's kind of the same thing because what happens is you have an outer query and then you have an inner query. The inner query is accessing for each item in that inner query, it's accessing every row of the outer query. So this is just a little example of how that looks. You can see the outer query is using invoices. And then our where clause, we have an inner query that is also using invoices. Okay, so this is a correlated subquery. They're both using the same table. So for this one, it's going to be accessing every single row of the outer query while it's processing for each item it processes. The exists keyword is basically just seeing if it's there, if something exists. um, so, the minute it tests true, right? So the minute it finds something, then it knows that it exists. Common table expressions I actually like. Basically, you're creating your own little table by selecting columns, and then you can query that table. So here we're using North Wind, and we've just given a new table a name. And then you can see that we're selecting 3 different columns from products. That is what's going to be in that table. And then once you set that table up, you can select from it. And that's all that this is doing. And that was like a normal CTE. A recursive CTE is one that calls itself. Okay, so it's like almost like a self-join in a way. So here we've got employee ID, last name, region, and reports to, where reports to is null. And then we have a little different query. You can see that they're both looking at employees, and this is our results. So if we create a recursive CTE using that data, we've got a name for our CTE, and then we're basically putting in that same select. We're doing a union. So we're combining it with the results of this select. Okay, that's all we're doing. So to me, the CTEs aren't quite as bad. I mean, you can get a lot more complicated with them. Okay, but I basically have you do pretty basic CTEs just so you know that you can do them. And they're temporary tables, they're not permanent. Then once you go through all of that, we are going to go through a textbook assignment. And I highly recommend watching these videos because it will explain the different subqueries to you. So this is where you're going to really practice entering the subqueries. Okay, it's in this particular exercise. And you're only dealing with a subquery if you have a select inside another select, because that is what a subquery is. Okay, so you can see that we have a couple different types in here. So this is where you're really going to get the practice, and this is guided. For the lab assignment, because subqueries are difficult, most of the lab assignment does not involve creating subqueries. It's a review of what we've been doing, which is beneficial because we have a certification coming up. So you definitely want to be reviewing what you've learned. So I've got a couple scripts that you're going to download and run. And this first task, there are no subqueries in this task. It's commands that we have been using since the beginning of the semester. Okay, so basically you're going to try to match the output. Okay, and it is okay if you make assumptions. And if your output is just a little different than mine, as long as you just throw in a little comment and tell me what your assumptions are. Task 2 is modifying the table structure. Again, this does not require subqueries. Okay, so you're basically going to be adding a column and then updating the data in the column. Okay, that type of thing. Task 3, this does involve subqueries, and I'm having you do the easier ones, which are a subquery in a select and a subquery in a where. So this is the first one, and you can kind of see they want the results for products that have total amounts larger than the average. Okay, so that means that your where clause is going to have the subquery in it, and you're going to have to do an average. And there's plenty of examples like that in the lecture notes and also in your textbook assignment. So here the boss wants to see the number of orders each customer made. So order count is the column that is generated from a subquery. So that will be a subquery in your select. You're going to generate a column. Okay, so I think you're kind of getting the hang of this. I'm trying to help you out and give you hints, but there's just 3 exercises that you have to do with subqueries. For CTEs, you're going to basically create a little table or a couple little tables. This one, you can see you need foreign customer information for people who live in Paris, London, or Madrid. Okay, there's a couple different ways you could generate the tables, but that is task 4. So if there's a couple different ways that you can do it, that means there's more than one correct way. So in this particular assignment, there is a little bit of leeway. If you run into trouble or if you have questions, let me know and I will help you. It is probably best if you send me your script if that is what you're having trouble with, because I'm going to need to take a look at it so that I can tell you what you're doing wrong. And then I can tell you how to fix it. There is a quiz. It's just covering chapters 5, 6, and 7. So that is what we have for this week. I did include a little resource down here on subqueries. Some students do think it's useful to watch the videos. So, if you get done with the book and you go through the lecture demo and you're still fuzzy on subqueries, I highly recommend watching that. Okay, so let me know if you have questions or problems and have a great week.